Please don't hit me. I'm already hurt. The pregnant woman pressed herself against the cold brick wall, blood mixing with the rain on her chapped lips. Her whole body trembled as the footsteps drew near, but the man who found her that night was not the monster she had been fleeing. Ronald Willie, a single father who knew what it meant to be abandoned, would kneel in that filthy place with his 7-year-old son and make a decision that would change all 3 of their lives forever. Because sometimes the most broken people make the strongest families, and sometimes all it takes to save a life are 7 simple words. You're safe now. Come home with me. Before we continue, please let us know where in the world you are following from. We love to see how far our story travels. The rain hammered against the garbage can, lids like 1,000 tiny fists. Each drop was a reminder of the cold that had settled on Fine Lane Street on that November night. Ronald Willie pulled his son closer. Their Thursday night tradition, Betty's Diner, was open later than usual. "Dad, do you hear that?" Peter's small voice cut through the storm. Ronald stopped. It was there, a whimper, almost inaudible human coming from between the cardboard boxes. "Please don't hit me," the voice whispered as Ronald's shadow fell over her. "I'm already hurt." The woman was curled up against the brick wall, her torn sleeve exposing bruises that painted a story Ronald knew all too well. Her hands were wrapped protectively around her pregnant belly, and her eyes, those eyes, held the emptiness that comes from extinguished hope. "Literally." "I won't hurt you," Ronald said, raising his palms. "My name is Ronald. This is my son, Peter. You're safe now." She flinched at the word safe, as if it were foreign to her vocabulary. "Dad, she's hurt." Peter tugged on his father's coat. "We have to help her. Like you always say, when someone needs help, we rescue them." Ronald knelt slowly, keeping his distance. The woman's entire body was tense, ready to run, even though there was nowhere left to go. Her bare feet were bleeding, leaving pink puddles in the rain. "What is your name?" Ronald asked softly. She hesitated, as if speaking her name might summon the very demon she had fled. "Sophie," Sophie finally whispered. Sophie Hunter. "Sophie, you're soaked and bleeding. You need to be warm and dry." "I can't. He'll find me. He always finds me." "Who will find you?" Sophie's hand instinctively went up to her jaw, where the bruising was darkest. "It's okay. I shouldn't have run." "I should have gone back sooner." "No." Ronald's voice was firm but kind. "You are not going back to whoever did this to you." Peter stepped forward, his 7-year-old wisdom shining through the rain. "My mom left us too," he said simply. "But she left because she wanted to. You left because you had to. That's different. Dad says when someone's in trouble, you don't walk away." Sophie looked at this small boy whose innocence cut through her fear more effectively than any adult reassurance. Ronald stood taking off his jacket. "Here, put this on. My car is right there. We have a warm apartment, hot food, and a soft couch for you to sleep on. No more questions tonight. Just safety." Why, Sophie's voice cracked. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." "Because," Ronald said, wrapping the jacket around her trembling shoulders, "someone once told me that the measure of a man is not what he does when it's easy, but what he does when it's hard. And walking away from you right now would be the hardest thing he'd ever have to live with." The ride to Ronald's apartment was silent save for the chattering of Sophie's teeth and Peter's occasional direction from the back seat. "Turn here, Dad. Remember to avoid the pothole on Rattle Street." The boy's normalcy in this unusual situation felt strangely comforting. Sophie sat stiffly in the passenger seat. Her body was coiled like a spring. Every red light made her glance in the mirror. Every car that sped past them made her sink lower in her seat. "He's not following us," Ronald said quietly. "I've been checking." "You don't know him," Sophie whispered. "Ken doesn't give up what he thinks belongs to him." The name slipped out before she could stop it, and with it a piece of her story. Ronald's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like Ken before, worked on construction sites with them, watched them talk about their girlfriends and wives like property, but he kept his voice even. Well, Ken doesn't know me either, and he certainly doesn't know I have the phone numbers of the entire Oakwood construction crew on speed dial. Good luck getting past 30 union guys who've adopted you as their little sister. For the first time, a ghost of a smile crossed Sophie's face. Their apartment was nothing special, just a 2-bedroom, in a building that had seen better decades, but it was warm, clean, and filled with the evidence of a loving home. Peter's artwork plastered the fridge. Photos of father and son at baseball games, camping trips, and school events lined the hallway. Books were everywhere. "I'm going to make you a peanut butter sandwich," Peter announced in the tone of a chef. "That's the best medicine. My dad says that every time I'm sad." Sophie sank onto the couch. Ronald's jacket was still wrapped around her like armor. The apartment's ordinary scene was bizarre after months of living in Ken's eggshell and pristine show home where every item had a specific place, and moving something an inch could send Sophie into a rage. "How far along are you?" Ronald asked, noticing her hand covering her belly. 7 months, Sophie said. The baby is why I finally ran." Peter returned with a sandwich that was clearly made with love, if not skill. The peanut butter was thick, the jelly oozing out of every corner. "I put extra jelly," he said proudly, "for the baby." As Sophie ate the first real food she'd had in 2 days, Ronald disappeared and returned with a first aid kit, clean towels, and a set of his ex-wife's clothes that had been left behind. "Bathroom's down the hall," he said. "Take your time. The door locks. Peter and I will be right out here when you're ready." Sophie stood there swaying slightly. Why are you doing this?" Ronald looked her straight in the eyes. "Because 2 years ago, my ex-wife Amanda, she left us for another man. Just packed up one day while we were at work and school. She left a note saying she had found her true love. Peter was 5. He stood at that door for the first 3 hours of the night, convinced she was coming back. I learned something that night. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives prepare us to help others through their pain." Sophie's tears came then quiet rivers that mingled with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. "Go get cleaned up," Ronald said gently. "You are safe here, I promise." While Sophie was in the shower, Ronald spread fresh linens on the couch, and Peter gathered what he called comfort items. His favorite stuffed bear, a flashlight in case she was scared of the dark, and a book about puppies because puppies make everyone happy. "Dad," Peter whispered. Her face looked like Mom's did when she came through the door. Ronald's chest tightened. His son was too observant, and it felt like too much for a 7-year-old. Amanda hadn't just walked through a door. She had been covering up a fight with her lover that had turned violent. One of many secrets that came out after she left. "Yes, buddy." "But Sophie is going to be okay. We're going to make sure of that." "Is she going to live with us?" "I don't know, but she's going to stay until she's safe." Peter nodded with the simple acceptance of childhood. "Good. I like her. She looks sad, but nice like the moon when it's hiding behind the clouds." Sophie emerged from the bathroom, transformed clean warm, wearing the borrowed clothes which hung loosely on her thin frame. The bruises were more visible now. A blue and purple map of violence on her jaw, her arms disappearing beneath the collar of the borrowed shirt. She sat down carefully on the couch, her movements like those of someone who had learned that sudden motions meant pain. "Thank you," she said simply. I don't know how." "You don't have to. Just rest. We can talk tomorrow if you want or not at all. Whatever you need." Sophie looked at Peter, who had arranged his comfort items on the coffee table like offerings. "Your son is special." "He gets that from his mom," Ronald said, then caught himself. "The good parts. Anyway, that first night Ronald barely slept. He sat in the kitchen, keeping watch his old baseball bat within reach. Not because he thought he was in trouble. Ken didn't know where he was. "They survived, but because you promised," Sophie was safe here. Around 3 a.m., he heard a sound. It was Sophie standing in the doorway, Peter's teddy bear clutched to her chest. "I can't sleep," she said. Ronald poured 2 mugs of tea, and they sat at his small kitchen table. In the dim light, with the rain still falling outside, Sophie began to talk. "I met Ken when I was 18. I was just old enough to age out of the foster system. My parents died when I was 8 in a house fire. No relatives wanted to take me. I spent 10 years bouncing between homes, never belonging anywhere." Ronald listened without interrupting, understanding that sometimes the most important thing is simply to witness someone's pain. Ken was older, established, charming. He told me I was his everything. For 2 years, things were perfect. I thought I had finally found family. Then slowly things changed. He didn't like my friends. He said my job at the bookstore wasn't worthy of me, made me quit. He handled the money, chose my clothes, decided everything. Sophie's hand went to her belly. When I told him about the baby, I thought it would fix things, turn him back into the man he was. Instead, he said the baby was just another chain to tie me down. The beatings got worse. He was careful to never leave it anywhere that would show if I had clothes on until tonight. "What happened tonight?" Ronald asked softly. "I dropped a plate. I was doing the dishes. My hands were soapy and it slipped. He attacked me worse than ever. And as I lay on the floor, when I saw him draw his foot back to kick my stomach, to kick our baby, something in me just broke. I rolled away and ran. No shoes, no jacket, no plan. I just ran. And I took something with me. I don't even know why. Or maybe I do." But she fell silent. Willie didn't press. He wanted her to open up at her own pace. "You saved your baby," Ronald said gently. "You saved yourself." "Did I? He'll find me. He always said that if I left, he'd make me regret it. He has money connections. I have nothing. Just my word against his." Ronald leaned forward. "You have us now. And Sophie, you have more than you know. If you are watching this and you've been in Sophie's position, know that there are people like Ronald out there. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places." The next few weeks settled into a routine. Ronald went to his construction job. Peter went to school and Sophie began to heal. She took over the cooking, real meals, not the takeout Ronald and Peter had survived on. She helped Peter with his homework, her patience endless, even when he struggled with math. "You're smart," Peter told her one evening. "Why did you quit your job?" Sophie glanced at Ronald, who nodded encouragement. "Someone I trusted told me I wasn't good enough to be used, but they were wrong." "Like when Billy at school says, 'You throw like a girl,'" Peter asked. "Dad says Billy's wrong, and also that lots of girls throw better than Billy." Sophie laughed. A real surprising laugh that surprised everyone, including herself. Exactly like that. But the healing wasn't a straight line. Sophie would flinch when Ronald moved too fast. She'd panic if someone knocked on the door. She always kept a bag packed neatly next to the sofa, ready to flee. At night, Ronald could hear her quiet sobs trying to muffle the sound into Peter's teddy bear. After 6 weeks of her staying, Ronald made a decision. "I'm going to talk to him," he announced at dinner. Sophie's fork clattered onto the plate. "Don't, Ronald, please. You don't understand what he's capable of." "I understand plenty. Men like Ken are cowards. They hit women because they know women won't hit back. Let's see how he fares against someone his own size." "Dad is really strong," Peter added helpfully. "He can lift 2 bags of concrete at once." Despite her fear, Sophie smiled at Peter's faith in his father. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up for another person when they needed it most? That is true strength. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment about a time someone stood up for you or when you stood up for someone else. Ronald found Ken's workplace easily enough, a shiny downtown financial firm where Ken worked as an analyst. Ronald strode through the marble lobby in his work boots and sweatshirt, ignoring the stares from the suited executives. He waited outside until Ken emerged for lunch, tall, well-dressed, the type who had never thrown a real punch in his life, only the cowardly kind against those who couldn't fight back. "Where are?" Ronald called out. "Yes, if you're looking for maintenance, it's in the basement." "I'm looking for you. We need to talk about Sophie." "I don't know everything she told you, but she told me enough. You need to turn yourself in to the police, apologize to Sophie, and face the consequences for what you did." Ken laughed. Actually laughed. "And who are you supposed to be, her new protector?" "Let me put it plainly. You lowlife. Sophie is disturbed. She makes things up, creates drama. Whatever sob story she sold you. The bruises tell a different story." Ronald cut in, harshly clenching his fists in his palms as he tried to restrain himself. "She's clumsy, she always has been, and frankly, it's none of your business. Sophie is my fiancé. We had a slight disagreement, and she overreacted. She'll crawl back when she realizes she has nowhere else to go." Ronald's teeth ground together. "She's never coming back." Ken stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're a hero? Sophie has no proof. No police report, no witnesses, no case. She's a foster kid with mental issues, and she can't afford a lawyer for the baby. I'm a respected professional with a clean record. Who do you think people are going to believe?" The smile turned cruel. "She's just a pathetic woman trying to trap me with a baby forever. And you're just another dumb sap hero who's thinking with something other than his brain. When she's done using you for shelter, she'll move on to the next fool. That's what girls like her do." Ronald's control nearly broke. Every muscle in his body screamed to put Ken through the nearest wall. But he thought of Peter, of Sophie, of the example he needed to set. "You're wrong about her," Ronald said evenly. "And you're wrong about the evidence, too." Ken's eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" Ronald held his stare, his voice calm but sharp. "That means Sophie is smarter than you think, and men like you always leave a trail. You're not as untouchable as you believe." "Is that a threat?" "No," Ronald said coolly. "It's a promise. Stay away from Sophie. Stay away from us, or you're going to find out how many friends a self-proclaimed hero can have. Friends who aren't kind to men who hit pregnant women." Ken's smirk faltered for a second before he turned back worse than ever. "Get out of here before I call security, and tell Sophie that if she knows what's good for her, she'll return to where she belongs. She has one more week before I come looking for her myself." Ronald returned home to find Sophie pacing. Peter was trying to distract her with a board game. "What did he say?" Sophie asked immediately. Ronald's face told the story. "He's not going to leave you alone." Sophie sank onto the sofa. "I told you he never gives up what he thinks he owns." "Then we go to the police." "With what he's right, I have no proof." "My word against his." Sophie suddenly stood up, her face determined. "Actually, it's not entirely true." Ronald and Peter watched as Sophie pulled out her phone, an old model she had hidden in her pocket that night. Her hand trembled slightly as she unlocked it and handed it to him. "A few months ago, after he broke my rib, something in me changed. I started documenting everything." Ronald looked at the screen. Photos of bruises, dates, and descriptions, threatening and controlling texts from Ken. And then Sophie said something that changed everything. "There's more. I bought a camera, a tiny one. I hid it in the living room in a fake plant. It's been recording for 6 months." "You have video?" Ronald asked, his face stunned. Sophie nodded. "Hours of it. Him hitting me, threatening me, saying exactly what he would do if I left. I uploaded everything to a cloud account he didn't know about. I didn't have a plan. I mean, I didn't think I'd actually leave, but a part of me knew I needed insurance." Ronald stared at her silent for a long moment, then gently. "Sophie, this is evidence. Real evidence. We can take this to the police. I was too scared before, but now." Her gaze drifted to Peter, whose wide eyes were glued to every word. A small tremor calmed her voice as she whispered, one hand on her belly. "Now I have something to fight for. Someone to fight for." Peter suddenly bounced up. "We're going to catch the bad guy. Like in your detective movies, Dad." Despite everything, Ronald and Sophie both smiled. "Tomorrow," Ronald said firmly. "We're going." "All three of us," Peter added with a grin. "We're a team." That night, Sophie showed Ronald some of the video footage. He had to stop after 10 minutes, his hands shaking with fury. The violence was worse than he imagined. Ken was not just abusive, he was sadistic, taking pleasure in Sophie's pain, narrating his blows like a sportsman. "How did you survive that?" Ronald asked. "I had to. First, because I had nowhere else to go, and then for the baby. And now," she looked at him, something new in her eyes. "Now I want to survive for me. I want my daughter to grow up knowing that her mother was strong enough to fight back." "It's a girl?" Ronald asked. Sophie nodded, smiling. "I found out last week. I'm going to name her Hope." Perfect," Ronald said, and genuinely meant it. If you've ever had to find a courage, you didn't know you had remember Sophie's story. Sometimes the first step is the hardest, but you don't have to take it alone. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that message today. The next morning, they went to the police station. Sophie clutched the flash drive containing 6 months of evidence. Peter held her hand, appointing himself her emotional support. The detective, a woman named Priska, with kind eyes and 30 years of experience, took them seriously from the start. She watched the first video with a mask of professionalism that cracked when Ken's clear voice came through. "If you ever try to leave me, I'll make sure no one ever finds your body. You're mine, Sophie, forever." "That's more than enough," Detective Priska said. "We can pick him up today." "Today?" Sophie's voice was tiny. "With this evidence, he's a flight risk." "We'll pick him up at the office." Sophie gripped Ronald's hand. "He's going to be so angry." "He'll be in handcuffs," Detective Priska reassured her. "He can't hurt you anymore." 2 hours later, Detective Priska called. Ken had been arrested at his office in front of all his colleagues. The same man who had mocked Sophie, that she had no proof, was led away in handcuffs. His carefully constructed image was shattered in minutes. "He's being held without bail," Detective Priska explained. "The violence in those videos, the threats, no judge is going to let him out." "You are safe, Sophie." Sophie collapsed into Ronald's arms, sobbing, but they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of relief, of freedom, of finally being able to breathe without worrying if each breath would be her last. Peter patted her back awkwardly. "It's okay to cry. Dad says sometimes crying is just your heart taking a shower." Through her tears, Sophie laughed. The trial was swift. With the video evidence, Ken's lawyer convinced him to take a plea deal. 5 years in prison. It didn't feel like enough, but it was a start. A lifetime restraining order. A promise of distance. And for Sophie right now, that was enough. On the day of sentencing, Ken finally saw Sophie again. She stood tall, Ronald and Peter on either side, her pregnancy prominent, and Ken's expression was one of shock. This was not the broken woman he had controlled. This was someone new, someone strong. "You did this," he hissed at her. "No," Sophie said clearly. "You did this. Every punch, every kick, every threat, you chose that. I just chose not to let you do it anymore." As they led Ken away, he glanced back one more time. Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She was already moving on. Spring arrived, bringing with it hope. The delivery was hard. Sophie's body was still recovering from months of abuse, but she fought through it with the same fierce determination that had brought her this far. Ronald and Peter waited in the hospital room, Peter having crafted a "Welcome to the World, Princess" card covered in glitter and crayon hearts. When the nurse asked if the father would like to cut the cord, Sophie said clearly, "He's in prison where he belongs, but my family is here." Ronald and Peter exchanged a look, both understanding the weight of that word family. Hope was perfect. Tiny fingers, her mother's nose, and already a fighter. Her first cry was strong enough to echo down the hospital hallway. "She's loud like you, Peter," Sophie said, exhausted but smiling. That means she's smart, Peter declared with the logic of a 7-year-old. The first few months were a blur of feedings, diapers, and sleepless nights. Ronald had converted his office into a permanent room for Sophie, and Peter had declared himself Hope's big brother, taking his duty seriously. "I'm going to teach her everything," he told Sophie one evening. "When Hope is gripping my finger how to tie his shoes and ride a bike and that vegetables aren't actually poison even though they taste like it," Sophie laughed. A real, genuine laugh. It happened more often now, these moments of pure joy, untainted by fear. Ronald watched from the doorway, something shifting in his chest. He had been so focused on helping Sophie heal, on being the person she and Hope needed, that he hadn't noticed when his feelings changed. Or maybe they hadn't changed. Maybe they had been there since that first night when she whispered those broken words in the rain. But Ronald was careful. So careful. Sophie needed time to heal, to find herself again. He never pushed, never assumed. They were roommates, co-parents, friends. If that's all they ever were, that was enough. Sophie noticed his distance, the way he would step back if they accidentally touched, the way he would leave the room if things felt too intimate. She understood and was grateful. After Ken, she thought she would never want another man near her. But Ronald was different. He was gentle without being weak, strong without being controlling, present without being suffocating. Still, she wasn't ready. Not yet. Summer brought changes. Sophie landed a job at a local bookstore. The owner was happy to let her bring Hope in a carrier. She opened her own bank account, got her driver's license. Small steps toward independence that felt like giant leaps. "I'm proud of you," Ronald told her one evening when she showed him her first paycheck. "It's not much," she said. "It's yours. That's enough." Peter nodded sagely. "Just like my allowance. Dad says it's not how much you have, it's how much you earned." "Your dad is smart," Sophie said, meeting Ronald's gaze. "He reads a lot," Peter explained, "but only boring books without pictures." One evening, as summer turned to fall, Peter made an announcement at dinner. "Sophie, are you going to marry my dad?" Ronald choked on his water. Sophie froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Peter, now Ronald, managed. "What, you like each other, right? You live together. We're already a family. It seems normal." Sophie put her fork down, choosing her words carefully. "Carefully? Your dad and I are taking things slowly, buddy." "Why? When you know something's right, why wait? That's what Dad always says about dessert." "That's different," Ronald started. "But is it, though?" Peter cut in with the philosophical confidence only a 7-year-old can possess. Sophie laughed. "You're right about one thing, Peter. We are a family." Peter nodded, satisfied. "Good, but maybe you should marry him because he really likes you. He stares at you when you're not looking. It's a little weird, but also cute." Ronald buried his face in his hands as Sophie's laughter echoed through the kitchen. This was a reminder that love doesn't always arrive when we expect it or in the package we imagine. Sometimes it comes after suffering through the healing in the quiet moments where an ordinary life becomes extraordinary. That night, after Peter was asleep, Sophie found Ronald on the small balcony looking out at the city lights. "He wasn't wrong, you know," she said softly. Ronald turned, staring. "I'm sorry. I try not to talk about all of it." Sophie stepped closer. "Ronald, you saved my life. But more than that, you gave me the space to save myself. You showed me what a real man looks like, what love looks like." "Sophie, you don't owe me." "I'm not talking about owing. I'm talking about choosing. Ken took my choices away for years. You gave them back. And I choose you. I choose us. When you're ready, when I'm ready, I choose the family we've built." Ronald slowly reached out his hand, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. His hand cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing a path across the cheek that had once been purple with bruises. "I've been ready since the night I found you," he confessed. "I just needed you to find yourself first." "I have. I'm Sophie Hunter. I'm a survivor. I'm Hope's mother." I'm Peter's friend, and I'm in love with Ronald Willie, even though he reads boring books with no pictures." They kissed gently and carefully, full of promise and patience. 24 months after that rainy night in the alley, Ronald proposed, not with grandiosity or a flashy gesture, but quietly in the kitchen while Sophie was feeding Hope and Peter was doing his homework. "We both have scars," he said, holding out a simple ring he'd saved for months to buy. "But maybe that's what makes us right for each other. We know what it feels like to be broken, and we know how to help each other heal." Sophie said yes. Tears streamed down her face, tears of joy, of gratitude for finding something she had never thought possible. "Finally," Peter exclaimed. "Can I be the ring bearer? I promise not to drop them this time." "This time?" Ronald asked. "I've been practicing with my toy rings. I only dropped them twice yesterday." The wedding was small, perfect, held in the backyard of the house Ronald had saved to buy. Their home with enough room for everyone and a garden where Hope could play. Peter walked down the aisle with the rings tied to a pillow, his concentration fierce. Hope toddled behind him, throwing petals with enthusiasm and a lack of precision, most of them landing on herself. Sophie's dress was simple second-hand and absolutely right. She invited Detective Priska, who cried throughout the ceremony. Ronald's construction crew served as groomsmen, their tough exteriors melting as they watched their brother marry the woman they had all come to protect. In his vows, Ronald said, "You whispered to me that you were broken the very night we met. But broken things can be mended, and sometimes they are stronger in the broken places. Thank you for letting us be your safe place. Thank you for becoming ours." Sophie's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. "You showed me that love is not control, it is freedom. It is the choice to stay, not because I have to, but because I want to. I choose you every day for the rest of my life." Peter, not to be outdone, loudly announced, "And I promise to help Hope with her homework when she's older and only complain a little." The small group laughed through their tears. As Sophie stood there surrounded by the family they had chosen, one arm holding Hope and the other Peter, she thought of the journey that had brought her here. From orphan to victim to survivor to beloved. She had spent so many years believing she was alone, that she deserved the pain because she had no one else. But Ronald and Peter had shown her a different truth. That family was not always about blood, that love did not require perfection, and that sometimes the most beautiful things blossomed from the darkest moments. Detective Priska approached her at the reception. "You know, in 30 years of this job, I rarely get to see the happy ending. Thank you for letting me be a part of it." "It wouldn't have happened if you hadn't believed me," Sophie said. "I had the evidence. I had more than that. I had them." Sophie watched Ronald teaching Hope to dance her tiny feet on his shoes, Peter spinning around them in a circle. Ken served the full 5 years of his sentence with no early release for good behavior after he assaulted another inmate. Sophie rarely thought of him anymore. He had taken enough of her life already. She didn't want to give him any more space in her mind. Instead, she focused on the present, on Hope's first words, "No" and Peter. On Peter's school plays where he proudly introduced his mother and sister. On Ronald's gentle presence, his endearing love, his terrible dad, jokes that made her laugh. Together, they were building something beautiful from the ashes of broken beginnings. Not perfect perfection was a myth that had almost killed her, but real solid worth fighting for. One evening, 3 years after that night in the alley, Sophie found Ronald in Hope's room reading her a bedtime story. Peter lay sprawled on the floor, providing dramatic sound effects. And the princess saved herself. Ronald read, with the help of her friends who became her family. "Like Mommy," Hope said sleepily. "Just like Mommy." Ronald agreed, catching Sophie's eye. Sophie joined them, squeezing onto the tiny toddler bed. Peter climbed on too, making it a tight fit. "Tell the rain story," Hope requested. It had become a family legend, carefully edited for the young age. "Once upon a time," Sophie began, "there was a woman who was lost in a storm. But a kind man and his son found her and took her home. And then Hope urged, even though she knew the story by heart. And then they all became a family, the best kind of family, the kind you choose. And they lived happily ever after, Peter added. No, Sophie corrected gently. They lived real ever after, with good days and bad days, laughter and tears, but always, always together. As Sophie watched her daughter drift off to sleep, safe in a room painted sunny yellow, surrounded by love, laughter, and possibility, she thought of the terrified woman in the alley, who whispered that she was broken. She wasn't broken anymore. Or rather, she was, but she had been put back together with gold, like Japanese kintsugi bowls. Beautiful, not despite the cracks, but because of them. Because the cracks showed the story, the journey, the strength it took to rebuild. Ronald's hand found hers in the dim light of Hope's nightlight. Peter yawned and snuggled closer. Hope's breathing deepened into sleep. This was her family, not the one she was born into, not the one she thought she wanted with Ken, but the one she had found in the most unexpected place. A rain-drenched alley on the worst night of her life, which was the first night of her real life. "Thank you," she whispered to Ronald. "For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Ronald squeezed her hand. "You were always there, Sophie. You just needed someone to hold the lamp while you found your way." If you've read this far into Sophie's story, you understand that sometimes our greatest tragedies become our greatest triumphs. That the families we choose can be stronger than the ones we are born into. Being broken does not mean being worthless. It just means you've been tested and survived. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that it is never too late to start over, that there are still good people in the world, and that sometimes the very thing that breaks us is what leads us to where we are meant to be. This has been a real story, raw, powerful, of human resilience, unexpected love, and the courage it takes to build a new life from the ashes of the past. Remember, you are not broken, you are becoming.